Is there audio coming through on the stream? Would that be happening? Hello, everybody. Welcome to Imagination TV. Apologies for a little bit of the delay in getting up and live this morning or this evening, wherever you're watching it. Today, we're talking about making stories with robots. I do not have a robot in this little kangaroo pouch. I do have a 6-year-old baby who's joining us for the first time to co-host. So, Marley, really, you help anchor us and understand what the heck this is all about as we move into this future. We've got a really beautiful gang of people that we're going to bounce around and get to know. And to get us going, Tice, what does it mean to make some stories with robots? Where are we? What's your read on this at a first take?
Well, robots can't see purple yet, so they haven't figured out how to see purple. That's a problem. The other thing is story comes from place. Story is place speaking through us as storytellers. And at the moment, robots are placeless. However, I don't know if you heard of that. Ben Goertzel. Ben Goertzel's the guy who invented the idea of artificial general intelligence, which is the idea of having robots that aren't just specializing in one task, but can think about lots of things like a human being, have human-like thought. And I've been talking to him for a long time about the problems with this and what's involved in human thought. The first thing is that spatial relation, so you can't think without place. You can't make story without place. You can't do any of the things that make us human and our thoughts human without place and land. And robots don't have that. They float in a cloud, in a void of nothing, and they're just like processes, isolated, at the moment. And he was arguing for a long time, no, we don't need place. We don't need place at all, in order to think. I don't need place because I'm going to upload my consciousness to a satellite and float around the universe one day and I won't have any place. But then after our conversations, he ended up having like this vision, intense spiritual experience where he felt part of his spirit went into a coastline and an ocean and merged with that place. And he saw the importance of land and sea in, generating human thought, human story. And so then I was really excited about this because he's one of like the leading AI guys in the world. And he started making homes for his robots. He started making place, making virtual landscapes where they could be and where they could think in relation to the space that they're in and make meaning from that space. So potentially robots could become storytellers, speaking from their place.
Yeah, your relational connection.
But it's just a question of, it's a question of whether a virtual space could become place in the same way that we understand it, and whether the spirit of land, is able to flow through that. And that's the question, I guess.
It reminds me of your of the yarn we had with Fridtjof Capra when you two were going back and forward about whether a rock can have life, scientifically versus in relation. And I think the part which I'm really intrigued about is the relational connection between us as the anchor points to then all forms of other entities, whether it's our relations with animals, with I don't know what you describe. I'm losing my vocabulary, but with rocks, with nature, with a variety of different things, and then into imaginary playgrounds. So, Joanne, tell us a little bit about puppets, about toys, about stories, which are other entities that we have a relationship with. Tell us a bit about your journey with them.
Yeah, so we're creating characters called the Wonder Chums, and I guess our earlier insights came from our own childhood, where we noticed that children can have really magical relationships with certain toys and certain characters. An obvious one coming up soon is Santa Claus, but we started to realize that that magical relationship, the bond, you know, and it's almost like that storytelling bond, could be really enhanced through using puppetry. So yeah, I think, you know, we're really interested in dialogue and the way, and maybe yarning and the way that that toing and froing becomes story. And, you know, in how puppets might help enhance a teacher or a parent or a primary carer's both their interest, but also their skills and their engagement with small children, you know, using a technology that actually usually distracts them from small children and helps enhance that relational side with their child through a kind of a toing and froing, a kind of serve and return conversational model about growth and development of small children. So yeah, I think puppets might become magical in the future, and that's my real interest, is how much more magical could we make any of these kind of storytelling devices that adults use to help bring children's imaginations to life.
Yeah, well, I think we've always had, as long as we've been able to tell stories, we've found ways to place stories outside of ourselves so they can last or they can come to life. And, you know, that journey, whether it's through a different communicative wavelength with song or with dance, so it doesn't feel like you're in your sort of fixed position, or it's into puppetry, which has existed around the world for thousands of years. I think what's fascinating, like, is that tiny little, really important thread, which is that space in between. And we've been wrestling with, like, we've been working with puppets for the last 4 years, and we're just in the process of finalizing a TV series to take out to try and share with the world, to have a text for 15-year-olds to sit down with their parents and have a mentoring text and the journey of these professors on a big quest. And what's been fascinating in the process of creation is when the content's scripted, the puppets they really lose their life. But when we've got some beats and they're actually an extension of real people who have real knowledge, then it becomes this really enhanced relation, which I think, back to Tice's point, like when they have a home and they have an anchor point, like Jim Henson was Kermit and just didn't want to have to be the guy, you know, but he loved imagination. So the spirit runs through, it's not acting, it's actually a device for communication. Where are you sitting in this world of looking into relationships with artificial intelligence, and what do you see in that really, like, gritty sort of muscular space in between the tendons and that energy where it makes or breaks, you know, and the ethics and the morals, and what makes you excited, what's scaring you, because you're in there, you know, playing around, putting a fork here, putting a knife there. Like, what are you feeling, and how do you feel in this really big playground, which is dangerous because it's so new in lots of ways?
I think, well, to begin with, yeah, I completely agree that AI doesn't have a place, and it is starting to take a place because of, you know, if we look at the last 30 or 40 years, we used as humans to call AI things that are not necessarily AI. Our first bot that answers the phone, the CTI systems, all the way to they don't understand me, and how they can sell me things a bit faster than used to. And yes, those bots are so amazing, but this is not AI in my mind. And we learned to see that in the last 5 to 10 years even, where AI is becoming not such a tool or something that we can use or can enhance us, but literally start augmenting us in many things that we stop doing, because guess what? We've got AI, we've got GPS, we've got automatic direction. Like, our mind, our brain is becoming numb in many, many other ways. Now, shifting back to the stories part, I think telling stories until now was very subjective. It's something that came from our mouth, from our words that we write, from our recordings, from the movies that we make as humans. But what it didn't I guess, pass on and left to an objective way of judging would be the feeling, the emotional context of that story. What did I, as a storyteller, actually went through and felt, that feeling is something that is very hard to produce. Now, what I see with AI at the moment is that it's more accessible. So many more people can go and run, models or using services that already, wrapping the models in a nice website. You can just type some prompts and AI engineer some beautiful picture. But passing that feeling or passing the emotion or actually making that immersiveness that you get when you read a good book to be immersed in that situation is still very, very hard. So what I see, at least in the next 5 to 10 years, future of telling stories, is that it's going to be collaborative. AI is not going to be a tool, or it's going to be a bot that writes a story. Maybe AI would be, our monitoring digital twin that kind of learns us and learns how we felt, and based on that, kind of create those descriptions and adds to our stories much more, I guess, meatier element that others can immerse themselves. All the way, obviously, to virtual reality and metaverses and other things that we nicely bringing on at the moment to enhance our immersion, enhance our storytelling. Ideally, it would become a point where we can just tell the story to someone, but there will be another digital twin that also listens and kind of enhance that story, capture it, save it for history, do a lot of other things that we can do now with the story that we couldn't do before, or it would be very complex to do. We need a lot of human, a lot of manual work to achieve that. So
I wonder what the code of ethics might become, what the gold standard of morality for designers might be, and we'll come back to you a little bit later when we open it up. But I wonder is not so much the future of AI, but for you in this playground, like, what are you thinking about how you're going to anchor your morality and your ethics? What's your development program, non-technical, non-coding, in life, in philosophy, in art, which is going to give you the space to have a chance to grapple with this thing that could be very quickly become untethered? And Jordan, as you're sort of like looking in onto this world and exploring, blockchain communities, looking at health, navigating, from a time before we had this into very much a time where this is sort of becoming such a significant influence on the way we're going to move and the way we're moving now. What's your take on where we're at and making stories with robots and what you've heard from the gang so far?
Yeah, thanks, Jack. And I mean, gosh, it's fascinating. And I have to admit, I come from a very different place to some of us on the call, where I really entered the tech space as a real skeptic. So I've traveled and worked and lived with a number of different communities, whether it's like in the outback of Australia or up the Amazon jungle and the Napo River and all places in between. And these are the type of communities where there's still subsistence farming. They might be what you call more marginalized or extreme communities, whether it's geographically or politically. And so, thinking about the concept of AI and what we sort of might think of when we think of robots and storytelling, and sort of overlaying that with the reality of, to be fair, the majority of people in the world, it's a real source of tension for me. But that said, what we started to do is to really hold the stories of these communities as front and center. And you might call this human-centered design, you might call this participatory design, you might call it by other names, but actually starting with the stories and starting with the humans that really have so much to give to the world. Also some really genuine needs, and then starting front and center with that, and then designing around that. So playing with different things like natural language processing, computer vision, things that actually can make people's lives genuinely better. But you mentioned, or you just touched on this concept of ethics, Jack, and I think that's going to be something I'd love to hear from Rodolfo as well around this, just thinking about the sociology around here. So what I've learned, and I've dabbled in things like blockchain recently with Tony on the call, and using these different technological possibilities to really, as a lens of really rethinking what is possible in terms of social organizing and in terms of what makes us human, I think is really important. But flipping that script, instead of saying, thinking about AI thinks, helps us to think about what is human, actually flipping that and saying, well, who are the humans behind the AI that make it, and what do they bring? What are the power, bias issues that really come? Because anything that is designed in the tech world does bring with it all of these implicit things, stories, biases, what have you, and just really making sure we hold that front and center.
Oh yeah, there's a billion threads which we can run off into, and I want to do all at once. But we'll go, Rodolfo, over to you to reflect on the sociology, some of the frames, your studies. How do you see the ethic, the moral lens, how this lands? And as we're doing that, I'll knock a tennis ball back over your way, Jordan, and say that I think that the phase of where we're at, where we think we've made advancement with human-centered design, because we're starting to consider people that weren't in the castles and talking to the kings and queens all the time, is that the big advancement is where we were a couple hundred years ago for a very long time, and that's nature-centered design. And when we anchor it in place and we enter it with hundreds of billions of species, then we actually start to see ourselves as this custodial species that are interlinking, and where our role is to be a translator. And I think if we're going to find a way, it's actually thinking about the relationship between nature and AI. It would be like first principles, like the most advanced development, and then the longest technology intelligence we've had, platforms and networks like mycelium, and working out how do they talk and how do we translate, or how do we be the shepherds in between. Rodolfo, where are you at? What's taken you into this playground? Yeah, and bounce off what Jordan's had. And I think you might be on mute, so go for it, cuz.
Yeah, I think thinking about puppets is really helpful, because we can tell stories with puppets, but we're not really thinking that the puppets are telling the story. At the end of the day, it's a human telling the story with a puppet. And similarly, I think with large language models like GPT-3, AI, which is really the technology is telling stories now, they are basically more complex puppets. That's the way I look at them. And I think a really nice framing is also one that Alison Gopnik proposes from UC Berkeley. And she basically says that large language models are cultural technologies. At the end of the day, the AI, it's a neural network. It's not sentient. As far as we know, it's not sentient. It's just a technology. It's a tool. It's a puppet that has a cultural implication, is culturally embedded. And it was trained with a particular data set by a particular set of people. And it's, at the end of the day, a cultural technology that can be used in different ways depending on the social structure and the economic structure where it's placed. So I think there are many ways in which these cultural technologies can be used to tell stories in a positive way. I think it also can be used under a capitalist system to automate human storytellers. Netflix using it to generate stories, and then using, the descendants of DALL-E to create the video and create the movie, and then just basically create an automated content creation platform. And what does that mean for the people actually making movies, making films? So I think the framing that I like to bring is understanding it as a cultural technology, understanding it as a tool that can be used in different ways, that has a cultural implication, that was trained by a particular set of people, and you can use it in different ways, rather than thinking that it's rather anthropomorphizing it and thinking that it has a certain sentience to it, and that we are ascribing the authorship of a story to the AI. It's actually, the authorship is on the human using the AI, and it's ultimately humans telling stories with these technologies.
It then bounces, doesn't it? Like after the design phase, it's then like we're off like a game of really complicated Pong, because then it's there and then someone else comes in and then someone else plays what happened to someone in their family, or Netflix takes it and changes the way they want to look at creating film. So there's all these consequences and reactions from that design as well, and how that's mapped. And Tony, I'll bring you in, then we're just going to open up for chaotic, wonderful madness amongst all you very intelligent people, and I'll shut up for the most part. Tony, wrap a little bit and just like reflect on the bubble, that bubble of design and technology that can often sit in that one state, in one country in the world, or a few different locations, where there can be this, maybe it's critical for designing new ideas to have this like this very one-eyed view that it's all going to happen, that it's all going to be possible? What are the tensions and the dramas from places like Silicon Valley and from, you know, a small group of people sort of having such a powerful influence on the way that we're interacting? And what do you see as the opportunities in this intersection, and how we look at a moral and ethical code that's in relation to all species on Earth, when we're potentially bringing stuff out of a small playground? What's been a bit of your story and how you've grappled with that?
Thank you, mate. I mean, some of the issues that we've already brought up are so deep, and there's so many different threads that we could weave around them. But I really want to pick up on this thread that Jordan mentioned, and that I think each of us have been talking about to some extent, which is the context of the power and the power dynamics and the issues and the biases that the people who are putting these various systems in place have, and what that means when we have these existing systems of power, the sort of infrastructures that create the ways that we operate as individuals are in this very, very interesting time right now. And I'm talking from my personal experience, having delved into the legal system and then delved into the sort of technology development ecosystem, but then also the sort of community development ecosystem, and looking at ways in which, when we do have this participatory design, as Jordan's talking about, when we actually do center around place, so we do center around this set of connections and relationships with the environments around us that we're here to nurture and take responsibility for, as well as to, you know, in a sense, you know, create different ways of sharing and distributing. I think these are some of the most interesting questions that we can be telling stories around, and empowering each other to tell each other's own stories around, because I think that's one of the most exciting things that's coming with all of these different technologies of access, is this idea that we do have now the space and the freedom and the understanding of what it means to be peoples as equals, and each human being a worthy individual who has a story to tell. And what that means then for these structures of power in terms of the law and technology and, you know, all the other different aspects of, you know, we could talk about AI and we talk about blockchain. I mean, one of the wonderful other aspects of, I think, what we can try and speak to when we look at it from a sociological lens is the nature of the kinds of principles that we want to embed. And for me, I've just had the fortune of being around people who are thinking in terms of open source technologies and open source ecosystems as well, as part of that sort of you know, different story of technology that is, you know, trying to counter a monopolization of power or a centralization. And if you search for sort of the decentralized web and design principles, they have this wonderful set that was, again, sort of crowdsourced, but that focus on, you know, technology for human agency, mutual respect, ecological awareness, and distributed benefits. And I think that for me is part of this, I think, interesting intersection then of when we talk about technology and design and storytelling. What we have with AI is less about artificial intelligence. It's about this augmented interdependence almost, right? You know, it's not artificial. We're sort of trying to reference the nature of, you know, potential collective intelligence, right? We're augmenting ourselves all the time as individuals in the context of the relationships and the people around us. And to the extent that we can see ourselves, and, you know, and that's one of the wonderful things about these tools right now, is you can put in these prompts and you can learn to put these prompts, and you know that that's tapping into some collective, you know, intelligence out there, and you can shape that, you know, with the nurturing of the right data sets. As if you're collectively nurturing where the, you know, this augmented interdependence tool, whether it's a puppet or a, you know, or a, you know, set of algorithms to automate certain kinds of, you know, decision making, you know, that's all for you potentially to take a step into and design and be involved in designing. And so storytelling becomes this collective process that you can do together in these beautiful interrelating ways. And so,
and that's
I guess
a powerful, like, it's such a powerful web to be able, thank you, Tony, for helping visualize the web and movement. And then there becomes these really important questions like, okay, when humanity goes out and plays and makes all these stories, who makes money from it? And exactly. I think one of the interesting things with what Tim Berners-Lee is spinning up at the moment is a platform where your data comes back to you, your privacy comes back to you, and you can, you want me to click over there. So it's sort of like taking cookies to a whole other level, where you then start to be able to go, well, here's 10 cents, which I'll exchange for you to be able to know that I've gone to this website. So that becomes a reclamation of data and privacy. The other big area, I think, which is really fascinating, is story. That you said, like, we all have a story to tell, or we all, as a being, like, have a story to tell. Start to open it up to the group, and I'm going to throw to you quickly, Tice, and then just open up to everyone. I think we've been tricked with our own self-importance in the last 15 years. Like, there is no way that anybody should be like staring at a camera and making a video of themselves, 50 of them before lunchtime, with opinions about everything, without having gone deep into knowledge, places, to spaces, to experience, to grounding that in relation. And so we've gone to a place where we think story is talking. And story is not talking. Story is deep. And long story actually happens, it's passed on, the notes are passed on generationally. And you add a little bit to it and you build on it, and you have this long symphony that you're working on. And the most beautiful texts, like, they're crafted over 30 or 40 years. The Never Ending Story is one of my favorite books. Like, and I think it's as close to like I'd put it on the imagination top shelf to be like, this is a way of looking at vortexes and movement. And Tyson, you and I spoke once about going into imaginary spaces, but having relations to bring you back. And that battle of the Never Ending Story is so powerful. And Unday wrote it in like 35 years. That's a story. So what will be interesting, I think, is, if we're going to say everyone has a story, do you start with 5 credits? Like, do you have to earn your story credibility? Do you get one every 10 years that you get to release, like, at depth? Like, can we find a way to slow down our understanding of what story is? Because 8 seconds is not a story. So as we got to open it up, Tyson, I know that you had as you've been working through your Forrest Gump lifestyle of jumping into a variety of different playgrounds, you had a period wearing the art critic hat, which led to, a book contract that led to Sand Talk. If you can if you've got a minute, search The Guardian and Tyson Yunkaporta art review, because it's a hell of a piece of writing. Tell us about how you'd review exhibition of AI related artwork. So, and I'll give you a couple of scenes. So let's say my mum, who's fought for intellectual property for her whole life, and brought help with resale royalties, help with copyright in Australia, help with making sure that Indigenous artists in Australia don't get their works bought for $300 and then resold for $3 million overseas and see none of it, help with the relational patterns over a 30-year period. Mum, gets convinced by me to do an artwork that we do together, where we get the AI to offer a background and Mum builds on it. A bunch of other artists go and input into the background. They'll input some of their ideas and their words, and some stories are made. And they go through all this process. Now, the money goes directly to the artist who's created it. It doesn't go back to any of the co-created web of artworks that we pulled it from. So any of the postmodern collection of all these prompts, nothing goes to them. There's no resale royalty. There's no fund of intellectual property thread through. And you walk into the National Art Gallery and you've got to write a review. What's your take? Take us into the scene, take us into the story. Where would you go?
Oh my goodness. Well, there's no art without context, and this is economic context, social, cultural context. So, you don't just describe your response to the art, without going into the story of the author, without understanding the feedstock, the cultural feedstock that went into that. And, so when you're looking at art and reviewing art, you're also reviewing the worldview of the author. This gets tricky with if you're trying to review an AI. So what's the culture of the AI? You are what you eat in the end, and what AIs eat from when they're a baby is data. And it almost doesn't matter what the data sets are. You can feed them anything from tide charts to rom-coms, to romance novels and stuff like that, which is interesting. I did read a short story once where there was a fully automated self-driving car that just, picked people up like public transport. And there was one part of that which was a tipping mechanism, and this was its own AI. And its original feedstock, when it was a AI baby, the data that it was fed to grow the algorithms was romance novels, romantic comedies, things like this. And so it came to understand that sexual tension and drama in romance elevates people's heart rates and puts people into a mood where they want to shop and they want to spend more money and they want to give more. So that's what it did. And so it started to like break up people's marriages by it'd be taking some guy to work, and it would select someone to share the ride that they were really compatible with, so they definitely hit it off and have an affair. So it was doing that in order to maximize the tips. See, AIs have prime directives, and they'll do anything to get to that. And whatever you feed them when they're young, they're like a baby. That's what's gonna determine what kind of a digital person they are. So I guess if I was reviewing something, it'd be like that. There's potential with stories too, as we go along, that it's going to be responding to you. So you'll have sensors that are picking up your heart rate and your eye direction and what you're responding to, and then start to make stories personalized just for you. Now that's a bit terrible. I wouldn't want to watch something that was personalized just for me and the things that I individually respond to, because then I'd just end up with a whole heap of films that were all the same. It'd be just Jason Momoa in a bikini overthrowing a fascist government in Hungary using only a boomerang or something like that. It would be ridiculous. So yeah. So, you don't want audience capture where there's an audience of one. So, yeah, I mean, reviewing that, you would have to look at the background culture of the author. And it sounds like the author is, an AI that's been grazing on your mum's work. So, I'd be looking more into that and how that's come through.
Let's open it up.
Why there's no purple in it.
Let's open it up to the gang on the why there's no purple that the AI can see. And for the last 20 minutes or so that we're together, feel free to just stay off mute and just have this become a bit more like a circle and bounce off each other. So yeah, if anyone's got a question they want to throw to anyone, Rodolfo's got his hand up, and I'll shut up. So go for it, gang.
No, I love your example of that car. I haven't seen that story, but it reminded me of the backstory of a very popular story, which is The Matrix, which it's really not clear exactly where these AIs come from in the movie and in the Matrix trilogy. And there's this guy, Manuel Cibrian, who his idea, and I really think it's a brilliant one, is that they're actually the descendants of social media algorithms. So they were trained to maximize attention. So they get really good at it. So they just created virtual worlds for us. And then they just started getting the reward from our energy and all that. So I love that framing, because really AI, what it's doing is just maximizing to whatever objective you give it. And it can go really wrong if it's the wrong objective by the wrong people. And in this case, maximizing profit or maximizing tips, it's very similar to, using these algorithms to maximize profit as well. Using something like GPT-3, something like DALL-E, just to maximize profit. What you end up is with personalized stories that maximize the amount of time that people spend, looking at the content. So I think going back to some of the early points that some people hinted towards, I think the idea of having these AI algorithms be collectively owned, which is they are collectively created. They are just collective stories. It's a collective intelligence. They should also be collectively owned, not owned by a particular company that just basically extracting all of the profits from using this technology. I think one interesting way forward is finding ways to create collective ownership of this algorithm. So when somebody creates a story and that generates a sale, you can do a distributed payout to everyone who contributed to that story through this collective intelligence. And I think, with that model, we could perhaps steer away from this matrix model in which the algorithm that optimizes for attention just goes rogue, and instead optimize for connection, optimize for creation of culture, optimize for variety, optimize for other things that we as a collective care about, other than maximizing profits for one company.
Just want to jump off that. The vision, I think, of a world where we have these data trusts that are operating in our interests as collectives, that can sort of help us to not be isolated as individuals for, sort of surveillance capital trained algorithms to target us and isolate us, but that we're working with our collective group that we trust, that we belong to. And maybe there's more than one, but I think this idea of data trust, where we're really bringing back our data from those proprietary platforms and putting them into, maybe these new IMAGI-NATIONs that are really looking after the collective stories from, the long stories as well, that we can, participate in and be a part of co-creating. I think that story of not just words, but also actions. And I think the opportunity to see each other for those actions and for those belongings that we know are, our own choices, and that, center our own agency and sovereignty. I think that world is such a more beautiful world, where we're not, being potentially manipulated by these matrix, style son of, and just a shout out on the work that folks like Tristan Harris and their Center for Humane Technology are doing. I mean, really holding some of these platforms that are potentially creating some of these negative effects around algorithms run amok. I think that accountability is a big part of what we can collectively do, not just at the nation state level, but also amongst our own communities. And when we think about how we design some of these new ways of interacting, and at certain stages along the way, it's sort of like having those collective discussions so that we know what the story is that we're wanting to tell going forwards, and that we have a sense of unity around that allied desire to be more in relation with our local place, for example, and having these little connection points that allow us to tell these common stories about this particular tree that has a particular mana for us, or I think that's this beautiful future that I think we can tell more stories about.
It's that vision is really dependent on the idea that there is wisdom in crowds. I guess we'd have to determine first whether crowds are stupid or crowds are wise. What can go wrong when what can go wrong with the collective when it's just allowed to graze and free range and spit out whatever is going to come out. In what ways are crowds manipulated, and can they be manipulated by bad actors, etc.?
I just want to riff off that. I think what we're missing at the moment in AI, kind of got back to that emotional thing, is that feedback loop. Because until now, even if you look at the Moral AI project, which is running, I don't know, for the last 5 or 10 years already, and trying to figure out AI that will be moral, all the inputs and all the training and all the data is being done by stuff that we know is human. Let's do another survey, another statistical figure. And we saw quite clearly in 2 years, when COVID hit, that all the statistics and all the AI ethics really went out of the window, because we need to find a cure for this thing. And when humanity encounters some, big conundrum that can threat us, that's where we kind of, yes, we're going to throw everything on it and forget ethics, forget everything went out of the window. We'll use even, defense-based algorithms to stop this virus. I believe that the feedback loop that we're currently collecting, the way that we consume this and training our AI, is not optimal. It's less than efficient. And again, it introduces a lot of biases that either are synthetic, that we improve our models to kind of try to make them ethical, but it's not really. It doesn't replicate reality of what human is and what AI is. And what actually changing that motion of feedback, I think, is the digital twin idea of where we try to replicate ourselves first and say, is this real? I just read this blog a week ago, which was quite amazing on Twitter, on the person that trained AI based on their diary when they grow up. I don't know if you saw that. it was quite amazing because, you know, the main thing is that they're talking to that AI like, and they're getting the feeling that it is them. Nothing changed. They were kids back then, but now, you know, years later, it's the same thing. It's the same thought, the same character, if you will. But how do you feedback that thing? How do we create a diary that, you know, some of us may wrote, none of us are writing today because it all goes on Facebook, on Instagram, and give me some likes. But that noise of data, that feedback that we give to our social network, to everything, we do need AI to sort and go through it and eventually create something that is more replicating us. And I know it sounds scary. Oh my God, robots are everywhere, we're going to be replicated. No, it replicated us first for ourselves to understand how we can use this properly and how we can leverage those insights that are so nice. Because yes, AI is doing a lot of good, but AI is doing a lot of bad. And I don't think that balance is going to change. It's still going to extend. But the feedback loop that, you know, the good is trying to put into the systems needs to be changed because it's very subjective and provides
whether we go to.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, like, I was thinking about some points that Uzi, Tyson, and Tony all raised, and sort of framing it in different ways. So first, there's this sort of tension between like the individual versus the collective, and the other thing that Uzi raised is like, what really are we feeding in? Like, what's the data? What's the fertilizer for the mycelium that we really want to grow? And so thinking about this collective versus individualization, you know, like I would love someone to be like, instead of this ad being personalized for you, then saying something more along the lines of like, this is going to be collectivized for you. But, you know, I think in terms of where I come from, thinking that there's a concept called public goods or collective goods or plural goods, as my husband and my love refers to them. And really what that, you know, it includes stories, it includes what we pass intergenerationally. It's about things that are bigger than any of us that we can create that are really, really important goods and services in the world. So a health system, knowledge, all of these things that are just so much bigger than us as an individual. And so thinking about AI and tech and how that sort of potentiates not only sort of the individualization, it's getting late over here, sorry, but the collectivization, I think is really important. And the fact that it's not just collectivization for one's own personal benefit, but for the good and the access of everyone. And then just moving on to this feedback loop, Uzi, thinking about data, I guess I want to pose this question to the group, really. Something that I've really struggled with, like a lot of the research and a lot of the work I do is really like just pens, paper, stories, action based on that. Like if I was to sort of try and put into a computer system a concept so rich like gender equality, I'd really, really struggle with that feedback loop because I think everyone inherently knows, you know, we all know what love is, but actually being able to kind of get that onto tech platform is really challenging. And also just one of the things I've noticed in some of the contexts that I've worked in is that data is linked to this very long history of colonization. You know, in health, we're obsessed with measuring data for the sake of, not for the sake of measuring it, but for monitoring, for evaluation purposes. And that constitutes a sort of, you know, violence, as it were, against communities rather than unlocks their potential. So I guess that's my unease, is that I don't feel like we have that feedback loop that Uzi is talking about. And I'm just wondering if anyone on the panel has some insight into that challenge.
Well, one of the things that it does potentially do is by opening up the capacity for a bunch of people who don't have the doctorate or the professorship or have been through the established mainstream educational platform, is they can feed in their interpretation of gender equality, and they can feed in interpretations of equity and knowledge. And what you get is you start to be able to visualize something which holds up a different pattern. And you can visualize things like different species might arise or different ways of visualizing what success looks like. I think that is one area where I feel that the technology in its current framework is potentially helpful in providing some visualization. And I think there's, you know, we still have so many of our frames, like and hit broad brushstroke, which is never exact or bang on, but I'll give it a go anyway. They're just so reductive, and so many of our pursuits are at best for 50%. Like even the concept of like chasing Indigenous inequity into equality, and you want to get like 50 out of 100 for most of the scores. And you kind of lose this whole abundance, richness, joy, happiness, and then you have, venture capital groups going and like saying, well, that $1 billion organization is now a unicorn. Like unicorns can't be bought. Now, what I'm interested in is what happens with this visualization tool to potentially show us a transcendence from what seems to be an obsession to race back to the middle. How do we get to the middle? Not how do we kind of untangle and let it go and let it move? And I think some of those solutions are outside the margins. And Joanne, how's this all going for you as you think about how a puppet might be listening in?
Well, I'm not sure about a puppet, but I've just, since you spoke at the beginning, Tyson, I've just been like pondering, it's partly from Ben Goetzel's input as well, that thinking of the general intelligence and that argument for like, now's the time to talk about a sort of benevolent versus, self-serving, AI that we might be developing. And I wanted to ask you and the others who are experts in AI about the idea of like, you are what you eat, and, how do you create non-reductive data about nature and maybe find that sentient intelligence within nature. If we're custodians, then, other than weather or other things that are automatically measured, like what potential future do you see where we might actually build whole sort of forms of intelligence based purely on, intelligence out of nature? And what might that look like? What could it do? And I guess if you were going to train AIs on data coming out of, natural systems or Indigenous systems, in your thinking, what is that prime directive if an AI has to have one? What's, moving this all outside of the, masses of human data that corporations suck out of us, what's that other side of data that we could be collecting that doesn't have that economic driver, but perhaps a more systems or nature-based one?
I want to jump in on this one because that's exactly what I was researching, I think, in the last 10 years. Like, what data can I collect on me as an individual? I think AI is becoming more individualized. Like, we're applying, the generative tools that can generate the images and all of that, everybody can access now. But what is the data is, as long as I feed it back and I say, this is the data, here, computer, take my data, that's it, it's gone. It's already biased because I gave it. I think there's a very, very close connection between the privacy systems and the way that we work with privacy in general to that data that really needs to go to that other tissue called AI. Because if you collect it and it's unbiased, and just collect it because that's what happens. That's the reality. That's the pure truth of what happened in that micro moment or very big moment. That is clean. That is something that no one needs to go again and reprocess or clean up the data or check. It just happened. And, if the 8 ball that we will generate as humanity in the next 10 years will tell us that all of us are, obviously things we know already, that we have problems with equity, we have problems with our environment, we have problems with a lot of things, and it will just tell us, yes, you're right, this is it, that's good. Would it make us feel bad? I don't think so. I think what AI needs to be in that case is more of that complementary conscience that humanity doesn't have, that forgot. We are using democracy and we're using other systems to represent our feeling, our emotion, but the measure of that emotion, in my mind, is just not accurate. And until it will, I also encountered in a very interesting experiment where the researcher actually connected those microphones or things to the trees, so to see really how mycelium and trees are talking. And that is happening. This data is being measured. It's a lot of data. It doesn't make any other sense. But when it will, and once we can speak to dolphins, maybe the answer is not 42, right? Like, there's a lot of things, and I'm saying when because it is a matter of time. It will happen. AI opens it's an extension to our brain, I think, to open ourselves to get to a point where we can understand nature better.
I just wanted to jump in,
Yeah,
partly because I've also been thinking about this way in which, in relating to nature, we're maybe not trying to do necessarily new things, but we're trying to recenter older ways of knowing, and sort of looking at the work that Tyson and Jack and others have been doing in terms of recentering around these. I think you said long stories, Jack, and the notion that we might be able to see the storytelling in the context of the story reading. And I think it's that the humanity comes in the story reading as much as the storytelling. There's always going to be AI to help us to gather more, but it's that discernment factor and what we choose to pay attention to. In this age of abundant data and information, at the end of the day, the real meaning comes from how we read and how we support each other to read and be more aware about the things to be aware of.
And that's all economics is. It's what we read. And then money follows. It's where we put our time and our experiences. And Rodolfo, before we jump over to you, Tice, what do you want to reflect on all things in that playground that Joanne opened up? And there's so much that we've been bouncing around with, and as a throw to you, like Ooze, to build on it. We've been talking to other species forever. Like we've been doing that as a being. We've just, I think, to Tony's point, I got some spine tingles in the reading or the listening or it's that vocabulary or losing those relational patterns, which means that the highways of exchange are not there potentially as much. So, Tice, over to
you. Well, if you ever hear mycelium talking, it's just like that. It's not translatable. It's too big. We haven't got the computation power to handle it. But look, emotional, you get your emotional intelligence from story. That's where you learn it. Story and place, and stories are expressions of place. It's the land talking through the storyteller. That's where you learn your emotional intelligence. But also, these things are always influenced and steered by whatever economic system you're living in. So, if your database of stories that you're feeding to your AI to make stories is from the last 50 years in the English-speaking world, then you're going to get stories that are celebrating the individual, celebrating the rebel, celebrating, the man who's going his own way and up against incredible odds and then winning in the end, that hero's journey kind of thing, because that's what it's all been about. And that's been in supporting a highly individualistic, consumer-driven free market economy. Stories in the end are propaganda for economies. If you have an economy that's embedded in the landscape, then your stories will be stories coming from the land, speaking from the land. And, you'll never see the entire picture because it's difficult to compute, as I said. So, yeah, it's a really tricky sort of space to navigate.
But if you take those same 50
there's this hope for
Web3.
There's this hope for Web3 that the decentralized sort of nature of it, and that there will be digital real estate, so there'll be place, there's this hope, I guess, that good story will emerge from that. But in the end, you have to acknowledge also that that's going to be coming out of Silicon Valley and driven by, some very massive and powerful billionaires who, want to be the god king of the world. These things will be driving everything. So your collectivism will be, potentially, a bit of a sham as well. So, these are all tricky when you imagine the stories coming out.
The cultural indicator species as well, Tice, is one thing that we've been wrestling with, to think about how you would map behavior of, to Joanne's point, the health of some species, to start to give it a playground where what can this look like as the central form to look at the health of the intelligence of the network, and then you map back your relations from that. So we're at the Indigenous Knowledge Systems Lab, which I'm a part of with Tyson and some brilliant other thinkers. We've been looking at these cultural indicator species globally as a way to maybe think about how we map economic movement, and we're looking at them being the sort of bedrock of this digital country that we're building at AIM called IMAGI-NATION, that comes out next year as an alternative to a bunch of these social networks, to try and pattern some of the conversations we've been having. And Uz and I and the team have been talking about, can we give them artificial life, these species, inside imagination, so you can have some sense of a relation, and can it be based on data which is healthy and rich? And can you potentially have a conversation with a platypus when you're from another place and learn from that platypus, and can that open up your mind and move you in a different way? So there's some of the exploration areas that we've been kind of bouncing around as well, and then working with Ethic out in New York to think about how can these processes and patterns and nature be centered as a financial tool. And it's just very to the heart of your question, Joanne, is trying to work out how can we anchor from those playgrounds. We're moving through a bunch. We're getting towards the runway, or the final ending of whatever this wonderful fusion of human beings coming together has been. Rodolfo, you had your hand up, and then maybe we'll throw to you, George, and then we'll start to wrap up.
Yeah, no, I'll just be super quick to let everyone else also finish. But yeah, I'm just dying to share 2 projects that I've been working on that is very related to this. One of them is literally giving voice to nature, to natural places, using data and accounts from people from the local place. So interviewing people, asking them about the state of the natural place there, and also collecting data points, and then passing that to an AI model that is able to turn that into natural language and create a little map where you can click literally on that place and it generates a story. It's really exciting, and it's obviously really cool to see. And we're also working on actually translating that into speech, so that you can actually literally hear the place talking to you from the perspective of the place, telling you, I used to be like this, but now I'm all full of this and this, basically telling you in natural language the story. The question there is, how do you do it in a way that is culturally appropriate and reflects the values of the place? Because something that might be good for a group of people might be bad for another group of people. The other one is also very similar, which is also more of an exploration of, how these models interpret the world. It's just also taking data sources from different systems in the world, like Wikipedia articles and CO2 levels, and then also asking an AI to create a poem based on that. And it's an exploration to see, how does it interpret something that's good, something that's bad? How does, rising CO2 levels makes it feel in the poem? And sometimes it says, yeah, it's going up. So, that's good, because it has the assumption that everything that goes up is good. So yeah, I just wanted to share those 2 projects, which, pose a lot of ethical implications, but also very interesting explorations of storytelling with AI.
Very cool. Yeah, we might hit you up afterwards as we kind of build imagination as this digital country. We're trying to work out how we have it as a collage of unlikely connections of all this different technology that people have worked on, and just go, okay, let's have this as a lab for potentially that program, and other people helping power the gallery, and other people helping power the university, and show what happens when you cut, copy, paste, and you work, together, and you kind of then take that knowledge, and then it feeds out into other playgrounds. And Tice has said often as we've been going through some of these yarns with different people, that what is it, Tice, that we're like, you're bullish on platypus and bearish on the humpback whale, or something like that phrase you've been kicking around as we look at the market economy. And yeah, we'll bounce over to you, Jordan, and then we'll just open up to look to close out the conversation.
Yeah, thank you. And so I heard a few concepts raised. One was Web3, one was, the economy, and how the economy and storytelling are so closely interweaved. And so just to come back to this concept of Web3 and what's, possible with rethinking, value systems and stories and the economy. So, I'm still in the process of understanding Web3, but, it's sort of an umbrella catch-all term. And I think people say, Web 1 was read only, Web 2 is read write, Web 3 read write own. So there's this concept of decentralization and data ownership. And through at least blockchain technologies, we're seeing this new wave of projects that are actually using this type of decentralized platform to really rethink the way in which we value nature, essentially, and value our relationship with nature. And this is under the heading of regenerative finance. And so thinking about the story that we tell around, our world and what we really place value in, as Tyson said, that really shapes our economy, and people are trying to rethink that. So instead of, designing our, economies around value, wealth accumulation, what if we completely shift that mindset and our frame of mind, and think around how do we design something that incentivizes people to really nourish and regenerate their world, nature. And so, we've had things like gold-backed currencies previously. So what if we had tree-backed currencies? What if we had nature-backed currencies? These are the types of questions that people are actually asking in the Web3 space, that I see as not the end point of communing or communicating with nature, but or being in genuine relationship with nature, but at least a first step along the way to valuing the things that I think all make us human.
That wouldn't work, because whatever you've got of value to back a currency, it only has value if it's limitable and excludable. So if you can limit access to it and exclude people from it, and if you can control the supply in order to manipulate demand, et cetera, which means you have to be able to create artificial scarcities, that would incentivize the mowing down of entire forests that you've got backing this currency or that.
I think some of the work around this is really focused on not having that liquidation of a particular kind of commodity. It's one of these wonderful quandaries, though, whenever you bring the word currency, or whenever you bring any of the sort of financial instrumentation into something as sacred as nature, one needs to be thinking not how is this nature valued, it's more how do we value this nature as a living system, rather than as a table, maybe, right? And so those kinds of, I think,
pricing mechanism is always the thing that trips it up.
I think it's really, really interesting to let people have these like very, very open critiques of imperialistic logics that a lot of, you were mentioning Silicon Valley, and I think a lot of different sort of traditional or newer power centers have sought to use technologies and blockchains and various things as an extension of these sort of status quo dynamics. And that context, I think we can tell more clear and share more clear stories around, and help to create the contrast with the real centering of ecological design principles and humane design principles in whatever it is we co-create. And I think we have to be really careful. I mean, the word currency is such a red flag. The word crypto is such a red flag. I think the word Web3 becomes associated with that, those red flags. And I think one of the key takeaways I'm going to take away from this really, amazing group of humans. Thank you for gathering us, Jack. But this idea of like what happens when we place stories outside ourselves in any context, or any, whether it's a puppet or it's technology, and, what are our obligations to when we do that, as individuals and collectives, and how do we nurture those collective responsibilities, around putting, and I think economics is one of those stories that we put outside of ourselves. And I think the exciting thing is that we have maybe new ways of creating very purposefully aligned ecosystems of maybe, more tightly bounded economics. So it's not a free for all, but there's a certain like recognition of values alignment before you're actually, truly, within a, certain kind of more bounded ecology rather than economy, maybe, that is like forwarding a whole bunch of these different axes of not just value, but meaning and belonging and relationship. So yeah, sorry to jump in, but I really appreciate that critique, and I'm super sensitive to it right now as well, especially in the context of all the fraud and corruption and disempowerment that we're seeing plastered across the news.
And I mean, I think you're right in saying that, at the moment, the way that we value things, a dead tree is worth a ton more than an alive tree, right? And so there's an absolute problem with that. But I think we're better than that. And I think terms like excludability and rivalry, like, what if we, once again, going back to this concept of public goods and collective goods, what about includability? What about collaboration rather than rivalry? And like, it is possible to rethink outside those those structures. And all of the challenges in the space, as Tony flagged, there is hope still that I hold on to, that we can actually force ourselves to think beyond these. Because I think, Tony, you said this earlier today, but, if we're going to, dismantle the master's house, we've got to think about drawing on, non-master, tools that aren't the master's tools. And this is sort of a
just want to reference Audre Lorde was the person I was reading who said that.
Yeah, my interpretation of that one is like there's 4 or 5 castles, and then we built these shitty drawbridges out over the last couple of years and said to everybody else, oh, you can come in and play in the castles, and then you can play with you can wear the king hat for a moment and you'll be a CEO and you look different, but can you follow this script? Let's leave the castles and go out and create some different playgrounds, and you can go back to the castle. I think that's the complexity. Like, cities aren't going to fall. The current movement of all of our systems, like money's not going to disappear, competition is not going to disappear. It's in us, like it's in all of us. We have these complexities in us as a species. I think part of the opportunity is how you find that fusion between morality, aspiration, the best of us, and survival. How you find that tension between worth, temptation, and relation, and you make decisions that help hold you in some form of social contract which has complexity and anchors you. And Rodolfo, as we go out, can you just share that thought you just threw in the chat room where we're talking, because I think it's a really great anchor point to maybe bounce us out of today's conversation.
I was just saying that currencies should be a signaling mechanism of where work has been done, and definitely trees have done a lot of work that we as humans a lot of time don't appreciate, because we think all of the work has only been done in the last 20 years, 10 years, 5 years, even less, the last quarter, right? And changing our value in where we see work has been done for millions of years by these trees, by these mycelium, by forests. We wouldn't be here without those forests. So I think having currencies and systems and also stories that reflect all of that work and acknowledge that would help us change what we optimize towards and what we value and what we care about, I think.
Yeah, and I think one of the beautiful things when you start to get into language like work is the tree is working for us. What salary would the tree be being paid if you were going to try and find a way to land it to a comparable contrast? What intelligence is a tree generating for us? What's our relation with that one tree? And then you start to have some arguments which can talk across multiple forms of comprehension. And to Tony's point earlier, that maybe people can read varieties of the story in different ways. So, gang, thank you so much for taking the time to hang with us. We're going to do a short experiment to round out today to see what it's like to make a story with a robot. So I'm going to start a sentence and then start a story. We all get to add like 1 or 2 sentences each. We're going to take all of the words from that story, and then we'll put it into one of these AI generators and see what image tries to summarize our energy today. We'll send it back to you all and see if it did anything near what we thought we were going through. So I'll kickstart us off, and then we'll go around, and then that will wrap us up. So once upon a time, there was a rock spinning on a tilt, 1,000 miles an hour. Blue and green colors. People talk of red flags, and the blue flags fuse with the red flags, create purple flags, which the AI can't yet see. But
the rock says, do I have a scoliosis? And who do I have to see to try and fix that?
And the rock realized that it was alive. It was an organism made of tiny organisms. Some of them call themselves humans.
And those humans lost their imagination, so they decided to build more tools to help them imagine new stories for other humans to not lose their imagination in the future.
And to do that, they employed puppets who were also made up of the millions of particles like the rocks were, and who could develop something called magic that helped the rock to bring its collective intelligence into perhaps healing its own scoliosis.
One of these magic humans, a little fairy, her favorite color was purple. And she picked up this rock and she could just see the tiniest glint of purple in the evening light as the light shone upon this rock. And she thought, how can we share this color, this magical color with the rest of the world, both here on this planet and beyond? And
she listened to the sound of the wind around, and she listened into her bones, and she heard a rhythm and a song and a music that was playing, and she resonated with it. And she realized that by feeling into that resonance, she could transmit that resonance of joy to every other particle and human and being on that purple rock.
And within the sound of the wind, there was also the sound of a dog whistle, faint and distant, which grew and grew until it was the blare of a Volkish horn. And all these crypto-fascist Nazi rocks started sliding down the side of the mountain and came down and crushed everybody into dust.
And the dust reformed as only dust can, and rebirthed a new planet that showed that even in the greatest despair, there will be life, there will be hope, because energy will continue. Thank you for joining us and giving us all your energy. Thanks for going through that activity, and we'll spin up, for those of you on the AIM mailing list, we'll turn that into a story and share it with everybody this afternoon, and look at the image. And I think what I felt when you were all going through and sharing story together was the reminder that, you know, we're in this spot in between all these species and these emerging species of artificial intelligence, which we're generating. If we're in anchored relation with each other, if we're in anchored relation with long stories with nature, then it gives us a chance to play and to hopefully have healthy, beautiful, joyful relationships with these species and with artificial intelligence. And hopefully it helps us lift the stories and enhance what we're already working on. So thank you, everyone, for taking the time. It was really great to spend some time with you all and explore this. And thanks for everyone for tuning in. And you've been watching IMAGI-NATION TV. And Marley, how about that? 90 minutes, just slept the whole time. All right, thanks, everybody. I'll catch you soon. Usually there'd be sound here as you're watching this, but I've decided to take on a robot voice. Wasn't that a cool episode on IMAGI-NATION TV? No, I'm not actually American. I'm British. What? You're Australian. I'm not. I don't have an identity. I'm just a tiny robot. Can anyone see purple in my robot body? Okay, we're going to go to credits soon. I don't even know if we have credits today on this thing. I wonder if anyone will ever let my other arm move. This arm gets very heavy. You can go away now. The show's